Gentlemen, if you can take your seats, please. Good morning and welcome to Silverstone, the home of the British Grand Prix, the home of British motor racing and at least for one day, the home of Automotive Logistics UK. My name's Louis Yakumi. I'm the publisher of the Automotive Logistics Group, who are publishers of Automotive Logistics and Finished Vehicle Logistics magazines, and organisers of the Automotive Logistics Global series of conferences around the world that are now held in Mexico, Europe, China, USA, Brazil, Eastern Europe later on this year for the first time, and of course here in the UK. When I originally had the idea, or when we were asked to put together a UK conference, it was at a time of booming sales and manufacturing in the UK. The issue was there going to be enough capacity to cope with all the cars we were selling in the UK? And then something changed, something called Brexit. Brexit happened, or didn't, or maybe happening soon, or maybe it won't happen at all, or maybe a bit later on, but something's happening with Brexit. And of course, with Brexit, the big impact on the automotive industry is obviously on the automotive supply chain and logistics. So that's a subject we'll definitely be discussing throughout the day, on stage, but very much in the conversations off stage as well. In the meantime, there's other new topics for the automotive industry. New energy vehicles, adopting new IT and technologies, global trade and tariff situations, not just Brexit, but Europe to the US, China to US, etc. Risk management, all the changes that are happening, whether it's climate change and so on. And of course, innovation, innovation, innovation. And all of this, while you can't forget your day job, the everyday things you do, tweaking them, changing them and making them more efficient. Because one thing that is for certain is that all the changes that are happening, whether it's trade and tariffs, whether it's Brexit, whether it's new energy, electric vehicles or whatever, it's one of the things that's become very important for enabling that to happen is definitely logistics and supply chain. So we're bringing together here some of the most important people in the automotive logistics industry in the UK. So please make sure you're open to meeting people, join discussions, ask questions. A very good group of people for you to meet are our sponsors. They sponsor the conference because they have products or knowledge or services or people to support your company in the region. So our gold sponsors, ABP, who hosted a fantastic cocktail reception last night, Changju Logistics, Inform, Royal International. Our global sponsors, which mean they sponsor all our conferences around the world, are CHEP, C&W, Confezione Andrea, and Jeffco. And our silver sponsors, Orbis and Proact. So visit their stands, read their literature, and meet their people. We've got a great day ahead, but to make sure you don't miss out on any of the great sessions or speakers or think tanks or the networking events, please download the Automotive Logistics UK app. You can download it from the Apple App Store or the Google App Stores or whatever they're called under the name events or Ultima events or automotive logistics events. If you want to use the Wi-Fi, then the Wi-Fi is as it is on stage on the screen. The network is Automotive Logistics and the password in capital letters ALUK 2018 or 2018. We are a bunch of logisticians, so we try and keep it as simple as possible for you. But please, if you use the app, you'll be able to see the whole schedule as up to date as it can be. You'll be able to send and receive direct messages to and from other attendees. You can read more about the speakers and the sponsors. And very importantly, we will be having some voting polls later on in the conference, and then you'll be answering those questions using the app. And you can also ask questions to the moderators. The moderators will have access to the app. So if you're feeling shy, you can ask questions using the app. But the preference is always given to people in the room. So it just enables a better discussion. It really is an important part of the whole experience. So please make sure you download the app and use it. It is genuinely a very good tool. But before we start, we just put some red and green cards in front of you, just to ask a couple of questions. But the most obvious and basic question, I suppose, whose supply chain and logistics is ready now for Brexit, whatever that is? I suppose the question maybe is, we don't know what Brexit is, who's got a strong contingency plan ready for whatever happens with Brexit? Green if you've got a real plan, red if you're still working on your plan or trying to work out what the plan should be. So if you can use the red and green cards in front of you. I'd say the majority's red. I'm pleased to see some green cards as well, but the majority seem to be red. And I suppose, prepare for what? How do you prepare for something when we're not sure what it is? It's a question that we keep being asked as conference organisers, or even in the magazine we get asked. We'll be asking the presenters to do that. But we could have Theresa May up on the stage and ask her what's happening with Brexit, and I still don't think we'll find any kind of answer from there. But in the meantime, your job is to be ready. That's kind of the job of logistics. We're the kind of, it seems sometimes, the whipping boys. There's been an earthquake in Japan. What are you going to do about it? Why is that plant closed? Why aren't the cars got there? There's going to be Brexit. We don't know what it is. We don't know how it's going to happen. We don't know if it's going to be hard or soft. But you better be ready for it. That seems to be the job of logistics. And one more question, again using the red and green cards. Is Brexit the foremost thing in your minds at the moment? Or is it the kind of usual logistic thing? Brexit's something that's in the back and you're thinking about it, but the most important thing really is the usual logistics issue. So I suppose maybe red if Brexit is the most important thing on your mind at the moment, and green if you've got enough other things to worry about. Yeah, a very strong majority for green then. And one of the reasons, I guess, for that is because there's so many things to do that you can't just abandon everything to worry about Brexit. And perhaps the second point is, you can think about Brexit and talk about it, but, perhaps we're not sure what we should be doing about it. But that gives you an idea of the feeling in the room. But what I wanted to do is really move on to our first group of speakers, the first session. And we've got a real kind of mix here. We're going to hear from an association, looking at what they've discovered to support their members, support the industry, an important industry association, perhaps with an emphasis on Brexit. Then we're going to hear from a car maker, a global car maker, to hear their views on what's important for them at the moment as a logistics or supply chain director. And then we'll hear from IHS Markit for some forecasts and trends, although as we've seen from the voting today, how forecasting the automotive industry at the moment in the UK is not going to be an easy job. But I think this session will give us plenty to talk about, to think about, and prepare us for the rest of the day. So I'd like to welcome the first speaker of the day, an old friend of ours in more ways than one, unfortunately. I'd like to welcome Peter Ward, the Chief Executive of the UK Warehousing Association. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Louis. Thank you very much. Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks, Louis. It's a great privilege to be working with you guys again, and particularly to be here this morning, sort of kicking things off. They say know your audience, so perhaps if I could just do a show of hands rather than the green and red cards. Who had heard of the UK Warehousing Association before you saw today's agenda or got along here this morning? Who's heard of what we do? Oh, that looks like we've got to keep the PR company on for at least another week. Well, we're a trade association, as Louis said. The giveaway really is in the name. The name doesn't really resonate very, very well with me because it's not so much about warehousing these days in this high-speed, high-velocity, dynamic industry that we represent. But we're effectively one of those trade associations that represent the logistics industry We've got about 750 members, all corporate company members. It's a B2B trade association. And although the lines are a little bit blurred these days, because most logistics companies are now full service operations, so we work alongside the Freight Transport Association, the Road Haulage Association, the Freight Forwarders Association, but our members are predominantly those that have got an interest in managing inventory, and I think we'll touch on that during the presentation and the discussion, the growing importance actually of managing inventory in these global supply chains. I've been in this role for just coming up to 4 years, and prior to that spent my entire career in the logistics industry, started in a small family business, typically in the 90s were acquired by one of the big growing global companies, moved around a bit, so a fairly varied sort of view on this industry. And prior to joining UKWA, I was commercial director at London Gateway, the new container port and logistics park being built down there on the Thames. So what I'm going to share with you this morning is a kind of rounded view, yes, from my role as chief exec of UKWA, but also just sort of sharing those experiences of the past. And just to sort of kick the conference off today, I thought it would be useful just to show you a very short video that we prepared for our conference a few weeks ago. And it was really just to bring home, as Louis said, this very uncertain and unpredictable world that we're living in. So the theme of our conference was adapting to this unpredictability, really. So let's just have a look at this. It's a bit of a sort of catch-up on what's gone on over the last year or so, and some of the challenges that we're sort of facing. So let's have a look, see.
The UK has voted out. The UK electorate has taken the historic decision to withdraw from the European Union after more than 40 years of membership.
I've just received a call from Secretary Clinton. She congratulated us.
President Trump and Kim Jong-un trading threats of military action, each more severe than the last.
Mosul, Iraq's second biggest city, is IS heartland. No Westerner has been here since they took over.
Inside the tower, it was like a war zone. Dark heat, pitch black, toxic smoke.
This attack stands out for its appalling, sickening cowardice.
President Robert Mugabe has resigned. Now this comes, of course, as the impeachment proceedings against him get underway in Zimbabwe.
The Chinese president could soon be allowed to stay in office indefinitely.
4 apologetic faces belonging to the 4 people who were at the top of Carillion.
Here in Paris, the polls have closed. Emmanuel Macron will be the next President of France.
It is a humiliating sight for one of the country's biggest food brands. Today, the logistics firm DHL apologised for that inconvenience, blaming operational issues.
While the government tries to work out a united plan for many EU citizens, the months of uncertainty are proving too much. The Office for National Statistics says net EU migration to the UK is falling as more European citizens leave the country.
We are living through an important moment in our country's history. We will forge a bold new positive role for ourselves in the world, and we will make Britain a country that works not for a privileged few, but for every one of us.
So picking up on the video there, adapting for success in this unpredictable world. This is a slide that we had in the pack before the referendum 2 years ago, before June 2016, and I think it's probably the most relevant because we are still scratching our heads. But I'll come back to that. This is obviously the big elephant in the room, but I think Again, just in terms of, as Louis said, this global world that we're all operating in, and I do find myself every day sort of reminding our members in UKWA, yes, we get sort of bogged down in the silos of our day job, but the reminder that most of what we're doing is part of a global supply chain of things. So, what are the other impacts? Well, we've seen this devaluation in the currency, and the fluctuation of currencies, the fluctuation of the stock markets. I mean, it's all because of the technology. It's all so quick now. Someone sneezes in Japan and London has a heart attack within seconds, and New York and so on. So we've got all of this volatility around currencies and stock markets and so on. New political agenda. We saw in the video there, this guy gets sort of elected on a bit of a dream and an idea, and then puts the sort of political system around after he's been elected to office. Very different to the way things work here. Last week was the Conservative Party conference, one of the longest established political parties in the world. So very different, changing landscape. And of course, Merkel losing her power base and majority in Germany. Very unstable and uncertain things in Europe. And this is only just over a year ago. And by the way, in case you didn't realise it, these people in Turkey are part of the customs union. And yet, here we were with a military coup for one of those countries that is aspiring to become part of that growing European community. Quite interesting. And against all of that background, and this has sort of gone off the front pages, hasn't it, just recently, but still there's this biggest humanitarian crisis since the Second World War going on in the Middle East, and ISIS and the terrorist threats and all of the security issues that brings about, as we saw there in the video. We're not quite sure what this guy's up to. Obviously, we've had the Novichok situation here in the UK, and the Netherlands are being hacked now by the Russians. So what's the agenda there? And again, in the video, there seems to be some reconciliation going on now between Mr. Trump and Kim Jong-un. But is it rhetoric, or is there going to be a real sort of joining on the Korean peninsula, or is he going to continue to let off this awfully nasty stuff, as has been the case? And then we get to probably the other sort of elephant in the room, if pardon the expression, but I think this is really interesting. If we look to the West, into the US, Donald Trump, America first, nailed his colours really firmly to the mast. Within a week of being elected, had pretty much ripped up the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement, or at least America's involvement in it. Made his thoughts very well known in terms of Mexico. We heard about the wall and so on, and has put the whole NAFTA trade agreement at risk. And of course, more recently now, the protectionist measures, the tariffs, affecting the steel industry, which again I know is very, very relevant to the automotive world. So a real kind of entrenching America first mentality in the West. And then if we look to the East, we've got the completely opposite situation. China now embarking on its Belt and Road Initiative, investing $900 billion over the next 20 years on an annual basis to build this infrastructure with a desire to reach 35% of the world's trade and 63% of global population. So China spreading its wings and America entrenching into the America first. Real diametrically opposed kind of politics. Again, having a major impact on the way that the world is shaping. And against all of that, we've got this demographic change going on within the world. Growing population, aging population. 1 in 10 people are going to be over the age of 65 in the next few years. And then the whole desire, 45% of that population now moving towards this urban drift, people moving towards our towns and cities in terms of where they want to be, putting additional pressure on logistics as we sort of know it in terms of getting into accessing those communities and those populations. So, of course, summarising all of that, this is sort of how we see it. We've got this very uncertain, fragile, unpredictable world. Of course, we've got a new type of consumer as well. A consumer that's now driven by technology, because just less than 10 years ago, Steve Jobs stood on a stage like this, probably slightly bigger audience than this, and produced the smartphone and said, this is going to change the world, and how right he was. So we've got this technology-driven consumer, and I'm sure those consumer habits now are starting to filter through into the business-to-business environment. And the buyers that you're dealing with are sort of expecting, even in a business environment, this speed of delivery and accessibility and availability in the way that they do in their domestic lives. And that's largely driven by these other two big influences that are going on out there. There's a new kind of culture because we've got this Amazon effect coming in from the West, and Alibaba from the East. The Alibaba model is really interesting because they've been able to develop this logistics model by kind of leapfrogging the sort of stages as we know it, and going directly to this, fourth generation of technology. And watch this space. How long will it be before Alibaba start launching their business-to-business capability in Europe? So lots going on out there. And I see that really, those are some of the key drivers that are changing the logistics kind of world as we know it. No longer this kind of linear process. We used to stand up in conferences like this, and you'd have the case studies from the logistics providers and their customers. It was all this linear process, wasn't it? We source these goods in China, and here they come through, and little icons, the warehouse and the ship and the port of arrival and the factory and so on and so forth. It's not that linear process anymore. We're operating in these global ecosystems, multiple pace, multiple directions, multiple modes of transport, all sort of operating simultaneously. And what's crucial to this is actually working out, well, what do we do in that global supply chain? What do we do where in that kind of global supply chain of things? What happens where is critical. And most importantly, do we understand the cost impact of those decisions that we're making? Holding stock at origin or at destination? Do we go close to the consumer, or do we, and all the intermediary points? And do we have our full cost to serve, really buttoned down and understood? So there's a change of emphasis going on, and it's changing the way logistics companies are operating now. Much less about managing those transactional A to B transportation services, and much more now about managing this inventory driven by some of those consumer behaviours for speed of delivery and availability and so on. And of course, you're the industry that have really created that kind of just-in-time model that we've become accustomed to. So multiple stocking locations, flexibility, agility at levels that we haven't really seen in the past in those linear processes. And again, all about this kind of unpredictable, how do we manage that sort of supply at one end of the supply chain and unpredictable and volatile demand at the other end of the supply chain, and get a much closer alignment between those two dynamics. And then finally, just a couple of slides then on Brexit, just to pick up on some of those things. So what do we think this might mean? And as Louis quite rightly said, of course, we don't yet know the outcome, but I do think there are some assumptions that we can make, whatever the outcome of Brexit. So first of all, and forgive me, because I do get accused occasionally of sort of being a representative of Project Fear with some of this stuff. It's not Project Fear. This is now Project Fact and Project Reality. I represent the logistics industry, the warehousing industry. We already have a looming labour and skill shortage, as I'm sure you do in your industries. But this has really been exacerbated by this effect of Brexodus. The fact that the Eastern European labour now is, the pound in the pocket at the end of the week or what have you is worth 20% less than it was before the referendum. They're not leaving because of the uncertainty. They're simply leaving because it's not as viable financially for them to be here. So the figures are all there. The migration figures are now fact. We're losing that Eastern European labour on which particularly the warehousing and logistics sector has become dependent, critically dependent over the last 10 years. Massive, massive problem. And that's now starting to manifest itself as some real wage inflation coming through in the system. I was with the supply chain director of Debenhams a few weeks ago, and he was telling me we were in an event such as this, and he was saying we're going to have to put our labour rates up just to hold on to kind of what we've got at the moment. And of course, we're coming into, in a retail environment, we're coming into that kind of peak season, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, mad, crazy weekend. And we're looking at a kind of 15-20% increase in our labour rates just to hold on to what we've got. And I saw him again a couple of weeks after. I said, Dan, how did you get on with your labour increase a month ago? You were going to put the wage rates up on Monday morning. He said, we've done it twice more since then. We've had to do it every Monday morning for the last 3 weeks. So there's a huge, huge effect here on our business and the cost impact, and that is going to cascade its way through to the cost of logistics without a doubt. And the other question that perhaps we can talk about during the conference today is what do we actually mean by this frictionless word? And this is one of Theresa May's favourite words, isn't it? This frictionless trade. Well, frankly, I don't believe that there's any such thing as frictionless. And my belief is whatever the outcome here, whether we're getting hard, soft, deal, no deal, transition, cliff edge or whatever else, simple supply chain dynamics say that there is going to be some form of interruption here. There is going to be some form of customs declaration that wasn't there before. Because for the minimum requirement, we're going to have to count this trade. We're going to have to keep a record of it. We're going to have to count it. And that means there's going to be some form of customs declaration at the border. I'm involved in quite a number of sort of steering group, consultation groups at the Treasury and other government departments at the moment. There's a lot of day one no deal planning going on, but there's also a lot of planning around the new customs declaration system and the fact that there's going to be some means of counting this trade. And so it's just some of the numbers to take away there. Rest of world customs declarations at the moment about, what do we got? 90 million import and export declarations for rest of world traffic. Add the EU traffic to that number, it takes it up to over 300 million. An additional 210 million customs declarations for import and export business. And these are all now sort of getting out into the public domain, filtering out to the public domain. So again, in terms of disruption and delays, current rest of world business, about 4% of that gets inspected. You can work out the maths, that's about 8 million shipments. How many of those 210 million shipments are going to be stopped for some form of physical inspection or inspection of the documents or what have you, if rest of world rules are applied to this? And there's a lot of talk about this AEO, approved economic operator status, being the panacea. And again, it may help if your businesses are not AEO approved. I would recommend have a look at that, see about getting AEO accreditation. It will help and ease the process, but it is not going to be the answer. And by the way, an AEO application normally takes about 6 months to process. And if everybody's going down that road, I don't think there's actually the number of HMRC officials to speed that process up or deal with the big influx of applications that are coming. This is a little bit more food related than automotive, and again, it's the project fact rather than the project fear. This term, Britain is 4 meals away from anarchy, actually was something that MI5 came out with after 9/11. MI5 commissioned a report after 9/11 to investigate what would be the impact on the UK if we had a similar kind of terrorist attack in this country. If ISIS were to bomb the Channel Tunnel or Heathrow Airport or take out a massive part of our infrastructure, what would the impact be? And this was the terminology that MI5 came up with. This country, because of the just-in-time way that we have operated these very short, little and often supply chains, particularly in the food sector, we're 4 meals from anarchy. And you can see that just in terms of how you know your local supermarkets are stocked. Very, very lean supply chain behind that. And as I said at the beginning, you guys in automotive, you're the guys that invented just-in-time. And of course, that's really what all of the lobbying around this Brexit thing is about at the moment. How do we put this mechanism in to try and protect some of that just-in-time concept that we've kind of invented and come to live with? My view is it's going to change. I think we have to adapt now to understand that there will be this interruption. And you don't have to go to Cranfield to understand how supply chains work. 2 key ingredients of supply chain: flow and capacity. And if you put an interruption in there that disrupts the flow, you'll end up with more capacity, more inventory, more stock in the supply chain. So for my members who operate warehouses, it's really good news, this whole thing. Really, really good news, because more inventory, more warehousing. The challenge is, where are we going to build it in this sort of land-constrained island of ours with a really cumbersome planning policy? We're certainly not going to get the amount of warehousing stock built in the next 6 months that we need. Some massive challenges. We've got the labour issue. We've got an all-time low vacancy rate on available warehousing stock at the moment. We've got a massive upsurge in demand. And by the way, just some of those locations where there is planning approval for brownfield site development, for B2, B8 warehousing development, there's a 12-month waiting list to get power connected, because that's the effect of the austerity of the last 10 years. The national grid now take 12 months to put power into a new industrial site development. So in summary, we've kind of got a perfect storm brewing here. And as Louis said, we'll come to these conferences and talk about all the issues. I'm not sure that we're going to solve all the problems, but my job this morning was really just to warm the conference up, set the scene for some discussion. So we can leave it there, and I'll hand on to the next speaker. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you very much, Peter. The first thought is, how do I get a job at Debenhams if they give the pay rises every week? That sounds good. Or if my bosses are listening, that sounds like a fantastic idea. But on the other hand, quite a frightening scenario about what's happening out there. It isn't just Brexit, but obviously, a big concern for us is Brexit. But so many things happening around the world, so many things that really will have an impact on supply chain and logistics, and supply chain and logistics will have an impact on those things as well. So under those circumstances, who would want to be a VP of supply chain management nowadays? Well, we'll find out, because our next speaker is Martin Corner, the Vice President of Supply Chain Management for Renault-Nissan Alliance. Thank you, Martin.
So, good morning, everybody. I think that's a brilliant introduction, in fact, because I was interested in the question Louis asked earlier. I'm improvising now. a guy who had one drink too many at least last night is now improvising, which is not a good sign. But yeah, actually, Brexit is a looming uncertainty for our industry, that's for sure. But actually, this year, supply chain has been impacted mostly by WLTP from an automotive perspective, and probably we've spent most of this year fighting shortages linked to that transition. And I think the industry itself is in a bit of flux in the sense of we're a bit unsure what's actually happening at the moment. The industry volume's a bit up and down. All the OEMs are trying to push all of the old engines out into the market, and actually our short-term focus has been managing the day-to-day business rather than focusing on the strategy of the future, which I'll touch on later. So also going on the theme, I thought Peter's presentation was great, and I like the video, but again, as a guy who's had one drink too many last night, seeing Nigel Farage's face on screen first thing in the morning has turned my stomach a little bit. But that's the last political comment I'll make today. Maybe there's some people in here who support him, I don't know. Okay, so yeah, so I'm Vice President of Supply Chain for the Nissan, Renault, Mitsubishi Alliance in Europe, and head of the production control area. So whilst my loyalties are for European-wide business, the slant today will be about the UK, because we were asked to discuss how can the UK be competitive, and the jewel in the crown of the alliance. One of the jewels in the crown globally is obviously the factory in Sunderland, both in terms of volume and best practice. And I think Brexit is a big amount of uncertainty that we're going to have to manage to remain competitive. So this slide, I'll get my excuses in early a little bit. I call this slide. I think I'm not going to, this is going to be quite a light talk today. I'm not going to go into lots of detail of specific things Renault, Nissan, Mitsubishi are doing. I'll give a flavour, but what I want to do in the second half of the presentation is talk more about the question of what are we all going to do as an industry in the future, because I'll explain where I'm going with that, but in reality there's a good phrase, a quotation I heard, which we overestimate the change that will happen in the next 2 years and underestimate the change that will happen in the next 10 years. And I think when I talk about what I think is going to happen in the future, we'll get a flavour of, I think the change is monumental. The car industry's been the same for 100 years, more or less. We've had an internal combustion engine, mechanical parts. They've been engineered and adapted, but the industry is going to go through a revolution, in fact. And how the supply chain adapts to that is absolutely crucial. I think we're key players in helping this evolution. I'm not showing anything new, I think, with this slide. We all understand what's going on here. But fundamentally, the change in technology, which is absolutely exponential, is also driving our industry. Infotech, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and even getting onto nanotechnologies and biotechnology. I don't know if you've heard of Yuval Noah Harari. He's a historian and author who's had a couple of books that went viral and boomed this year. One's called Sapiens, which is the history of humanity. His second book's called Homo Deus. And if anybody wants to really freak themselves out, please read Homo Deus, because he basically extrapolates the direction we're going and what's currently available with this technology. And let's put it in context. I'm going to talk about what Renault Nissan Alliance is doing in terms of connected vehicles and autonomous drive and zero emission. Actually, the ability to integrate with humanity and some sort of convergence between technology and humanity is literally around the corner. And it's back to my point of change. This change will be more exponential than we think. I think, so the product side of it and the technology is quite clear. The sustainability and the change in society is also a factor that's driving our strategy as an OEM and a car maker. I think the world's changing fast. I don't know if anybody saw the UN report that came out yesterday or the day before about climate change. Pretty alarming. But also the behaviour of consumers in cities and urbanisation is also going to be a big change to the automotive industry, which I'll come back to. And I think both Louis and Peter alluded to this. People's expectations have changed. The Amazon-led society, what people want as a consumer versus what they were prepared to have in the past has changed significantly. So we're having to think about our business model as an automotive company. I think the historical way that people bought a car, they owned the car, they ran it for 5 years, then they replaced it, they bought parts while they were owning the car. It's all changing, and the consumer of the future wants a more adaptable business model and an adaptable solution and offering from us as a car maker. So these are the things behind the scenes which are driving the strategy of the OEMs now in the industry. This is the only slide I'm going to put up about Brexit. I've deliberately not got any text on there. I mean, fundamentally, obviously, like all the other OEMs and like all of you people in the room, we have a lot of contingency planning in the background for Brexit. There's a number of different scenarios we're studying. I would have liked to have been stood here understanding what the future trade arrangement is going to be and having some clarity, but obviously we're still in a situation where that clarity is not there. So I'm going to skip past this slide. I'm not going to apologise for it. Our Alliance chairman made a comment in the press last week that probably everybody saw, that actually that some of the contingency planning is deep, and he's not prepared to declare it because he'll be accused of scaremongering and Project Fear. Well, I reiterate what Peter said. The impacts are Project Fact, but very much the solution will determine which version of Project Fact it's going to be. But for certain, it's going to be disruptive, and for certain, the supply chain options we're studying could be highly significant, dependent on the final deal that's struck. So in terms of the automotive industry itself, I touched on this. I mean, fundamentally, I've worked for the automotive industry for 18 years now. Prior to that, I was in retail and electrical for a few years after university. But for the first time in that 18 years, actually, I'm quite proud to work for the industry. And that might seem stupid. I've got lots of colleagues who love cars and are very passionate. But actually, the last few years where we are as an industry, we're finally going to be a commodity which is going to change society for the better, actually. We're going to improve people's lives. We're going to improve the environment. We're going to create something that's going to actually add value. If you think of the autonomous drive technologies here today, I think the only thing that's holding us back at the moment is probably regulation, insurance, confidence, but the technology is there. We've tested vehicles that drive around cities. We've done it in London and Tokyo. The technology is sound. The connectivity of that as well is something that I'll touch on in a moment. That also will be something which will change people's lives. And if you think of the concept that there's a trust angle to this, but in actual fact, technologically, in terms of the vehicle, you could send your car to pick up your child from school or take them to football. That is a significant shift in the way people can do their lives. And also the zero emission aspect is a clear business strategy for us. So the automotive industry is really going to change. In terms of the Renault-Nissan-Mitsubishi Alliance, this was declared last year. It was called Alliance 2022. And Carlos Ghosn, the chairman of the Alliance, declared this. By 2022, which 4 years away, it's not long, we'll have 40 autonomous drive models on the market, full autonomous drive capability. We'll have a business model where we'll be utilizing autonomous drive for robo-taxis, which is linked to this different mindset of what people will want from a consumer perspective in the future. Electric vehicles will be significant. They'll be around 70% of our lineup in the future. And like I said before, we've been managing internal combustion engines for 100 years. This is brand new technology, very software driven. And the way we adapt to managing this offering and this supply chain is going to be very difficult, and the most change the automotive industry's ever seen in a very short space of time. The cars will be connected. 90% of them will be connected to the Internet of Things. And even silly examples, you could start driving home from work, and that drive will tell your oven to switch on at home or the heating at home. This is the type of connectivity we'll be able to integrate into our lives. The other thing we'll be using is the traditional economies of scale, common platforms across Renault, Nissan and Mitsubishi vehicles. 9 million of our cars by then, out of 14 million as an aspiration, will be using the same parts and the same platforms. As a supply chain guy, I think we've got a bit of a contradiction of this global footprint, common sourcing, long lead time supply chains sourced in Thailand, wherever, versus our just-in-time speed and synchronization with the customer. So that's a big challenge, and we'll be using common engines and powertrains. So the aspirations for the Alliance are quite huge, and like I said, that's a 4-year horizon. It's around the corner, it's tomorrow, and we're starting to change our business to adapt to that today. So, logistics and supply chain. What I could have done here is put up a nice Gartner maturity curve or some study that shows where we are. And basically what those studies show is that we're very cost efficient, but we're not very value creating. And I like this picture because, quite frankly, having worked in logistics, supply chain and purchasing for the last 20 odd years, all that happens is every year we get squeezed to drain the last drop of efficiency out of something that's been re-engineered year after year after year after year. And I'm sure all the logistics companies in the room are absolutely sick to death of the OEMs coming in saying, can we have another 5% cost reduction this year, by the way? Thank you very much. So that's basically where I think we sit. And the comparison with that and this, in terms of our investment in digital, stupid picture, I know, but in our industry, we have all the money going into R&D on the product and all the money going into investment in the manufacturing facilities. And for me, logistics and supply chain has always been the poor relation. We don't get the capex, we don't get the investment, we can't really make that evolution with the money that's made available to us. So maybe that's an off-the-record comment. I don't want my boss to hear that, but that's how I feel our industry works. And all we try and do is to squeeze that orange using equipment that's 50 years old and old-fashioned ways of working. However, this slide's a bit busy, but the other thing that I think's happened in the last 4 or 5 years is I think the systems and technology and digital revolution has also a little bit democratized where we are, because things are now becoming easier to adapt a very fast, low-cost system to help our agility. So from a supply chain perspective, 2 or 3 years ago, we decided our direction was to synchronize with the customer, to try and be as agile as possible, reduce the order to delivery lead time cycle to a lower value as possible, make cars more in tune with what the customer wants rather than the selling from stock business model that, again, we've had for many years. So the purpose of this schematic is just to show actually there's many initiatives we're working on, and we're looking end-to-end supply chain. And I think the couple of things I'd like to highlight, there's lots of, I'd say, small efficiency type projects in our compounds. We're using iPads to do inventory tracking. We're managing the supply chain on plant with connected and integrated information systems where if there's a parts supply, it's all immediately highlighted through a system and it links to the MRP system. So there's all sort of Kaizen, to use the Japanese phrase, improvements that we're making. But I think the big picture item that is most interesting is we're trying to look at analytics of customer behavior and demand. So we recognize that inventory and storage is a big cash flow drain, particularly with the lead times that we have and the global supply chain we have. So actually being faster to understand what the right type of inventory is, having less of it around us, but being able to react faster is crucial. So we've got a few projects that are ongoing. Steve Sutcliffe is in my team, and he manages all this actually as a pilot. We call it supply chain transformation, and we've done a couple of really great case studies currently to model, use artificial intelligence to forecast what inventory we should have around us based on real demand. So this is a work in progress. It's not perfect, but the good thing is we're able to be a bit more agile and adaptable to put in shadow systems and fast implementation of things. We can trial them. It's relatively low cost. So I think this is the good news story. This is something that's adaptable. But going on to the future, and I think this is, we've already had the elephant in the room mentioned a few times, and it's my next slide, but what's the future of automotive logistics and supply chain? If you read all the academic research, there's these grand ideas that we're going to have a super grid of connected data, a zero-touch supply chain where the demand from the consumer will filter out into this network. It will assess that demand. It will buy the logistics from a connected pool of logistics companies, and that will then get delivered on autonomous drive vehicles. And again, the technology for this is here. It's there. We could use it. The elephant in the room is that the current business model really doesn't allow us to do that. And I think everyone in this room, if we're honest, and competition law is obviously a factor here, and maybe if we leave the EU, we can do what we want in the UK, I don't know. But we all operate in silos. I compete with Toyota, Honda, JLR, etc. for services, for cost, for infrastructure, for capacity. You all compete with each other to win those contracts. And in the logistics industry, in fact, that's where we still have the most waste. And this academic version of the future versus the reality, I don't see how we bridge that gap unless there's a real change in mindset of how we operate together. Because quite frankly, the last slide I showed about all the digitalization, we're still working things with our system as Nissan, with our version of data, to make sure we have the capacity we want, and basically the result is waste. And the elephants in the room from my perspective are, we know in our industry, empty miles is the tragedy and the waste, and it incurs cost. And it incurs CO2 if we want to go down an ethical route. And we're not efficient. And particularly in the automotive industry, we have powertrain, for example, that's very heavy, where the truck is maybe 25% full. And there's no capacity or ability now to actually fill that truck with something else, whether it's packets of crisps or babies' nappies or something, where we could optimize the way we operate together. I think competition has become a weakness, actually. And again, this is my opinion. It's not the official opinion of Renault, Nissan or Mitsubishi, but we now are in a situation where driving that competition between ourselves as a commodity means that there's nowhere else to go. And going back to the orange that's been squeezed to death, if we keep competing with each other, we're never going to make a step change of improving that efficiency, taking away the waste. I think complexity of choice is also an issue. We're bombarded with software companies and solutions from various people, and how do we know which is the next step? How do we know which is the right one to pick? How do we know what the game change is going to be? And again, I'm sure all my competitors as OEMs are all doing the same thing as me. We're trialing lots of little things, but if we continue down that path, the game changer of basically that connected, joined up supply chain is never going to happen. And I think I mentioned that there's a positive aspect to the low-cost solutions and digital solutions we're trialing, but actually I still think investment and competitiveness is an issue. However we like to dress it up, the car industry and the logistics and supply chain industry, it's a relatively low-margin industry compared to other sectors. And fighting for that investment to make the step change in supply chain, I think, is something that's still a big problem for us. Our job in supply chain is to fight the good fight, but often we lose if there's regulatory investment needed in the plant, for example. So another nice quotation, I think it's an obvious one. I think if we keep working the way we're working and managing in the way we're working, it's great. We're relatively efficient. We've done a good job, I think, for decades, but we won't make that step change to really create the supply chain of the future that the academics tell us is possible. So my view of the future is I would like to move towards an integrated global supply chain, somehow balancing the just-in-time deliveries we have from Europe to our European factories with the global footprint of parts we have because of the global sourcing that all the OEMs have today. I think I'd like us to be more collaborative. I'd like us all to share means together. I've got no issue with sharing trucks with Jaguar Land Rover, Toyota, whoever, even if they have with me still. So those barriers need to be broken down. And I think we need to have standardized data and infrastructure to really break the barriers of these siloed solutions that we have. Obviously, we need to kill empty miles. I want us to reduce waste. I'd like to move towards this zero-touch systemized supply chain instead of having people working on spreadsheets and mainframe systems that we've had in operation for the last 30 years. And I'd love the acceleration of autonomous drive facilities, warehouse facilities, trucks, infrastructure, because that's the direction our industry is moving, and I'd like our supply chain to move with that. And I'd like us to move towards value creation. So I mentioned the Gartner supply chain earlier. It's funny, our top bosses want us to move to the highest level of maturity. And if anyone who's seen that, it's basically a mixture of value creation and cost, and it loops round. And right at the top, you've got Amazon and Nike and companies like this, which I think my boss telling me he wants our supply chain to be like Amazon is a bit misleading. We're not Amazon. Their business is a supply chain. That really is a commodity, and it's fast-paced, it's sell from stock and low touch. So we can never be that. But I do think there's a role for us to actually add value to the customer. I think particularly on the outbound logistics side, we can offer solutions to the consumer that will make it attractive, And actually, I think it's things that the consumer will pay for. And I think we all know any experience you all have in buying a car is pretty painful. You have to go to a dealership. It's a horrible transaction. Normally, you're bamboozled by finance deals. It's inconvenient to get there. You have to go when they're open. Then you have to wait X amount of time to get your car and turn up on X day. We can't give you a confirmed delivery date. Well, just quite simply, if you could buy your car online, if you could use some sort of artificial intelligence to spec your car where you're in a world and you're speccing it and it looks real, and then that car's delivered to your door when you want it. I mean, I think people would pay for that experience rather than the current way of buying cars. So I think the positive one thing I want to end on is I think there's so much value we can work on as a supply chain to really improve the experience for the consumer and take this wonderful product that's coming to the consumer. And I think we've all got a part to play in that. But just to finish, I think we've got to stop competing. We are a commodity. We're a small percentage of the total cost of selling a car to a customer. And I think we can add value by actually doing things together. All the things I mentioned earlier, standardizing, working together on the breakthrough digital solutions, and the logistics companies maybe being a bit more open to working together and sharing the contracts you have with us together so that one day maybe truck X from company Y will get the business and vice versa. There's probably a win-win. I recognize it's complicated, but again, as a customer, I'm speaking, I see that as the future. So that's me. I'm conscious the time's run out, so I'd best wrap up. But like I said, I wasn't coming with answers. I think there's a lot of questions we need to address. And I think we need to be really conscious the change in our industry is going to be immense. It's going to be exponential in the next 4 to 5 years. And somehow we need to adapt with that in a way we've never worked before. So that's my conclusion. So thank you.
Again, another great presentation there from Martin Corner, very visionary. And I know that, we hear these discussions about collaboration and partnership and so on. And I know that Martin really means it, as opposed to sometimes how the impression have been in the past when we've heard these presentations. Martin will be around all day and will be a part of the final panel this afternoon. So if you've got any more questions, there will be a Q&A at the end of this session, but it'll also be part of the final panel if you want to ask some questions then as well. But it was a bit more positive than we did talk about the issues, but as Martin was trying to do there was find solutions. So having heard everything that you've heard this morning about all the challenges that are out there, all the change that's going to be happening, it must be really easy to forecast sales and production. So I'd like to hear the views of Martin Benecke, the Manager of Light Vehicle Sales Forecasting from IHS Markit.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Do you have click? Okay. Thanks. Yeah. So hello everybody. Thanks for the invitation to get here again this year. So I'm Martin Benecke, the manager at IHS Markit. I'm located in Germany, in Essen. And I'm leading a team of analysts when we are trying to do forecasts, vehicle sales forecasts globally, and I'm the head of West European part. So what I'm doing with you now in the next minutes is an overview, a bit of macro, so I'm more the number guys. And then afterwards we will have a look on global sales and production outlook, and then question and answers will be then in the panel. First thing, some numbers. So what is going on in the global world? How are the economies? In which conditions are they? So we see the good thing is that the global economy is still growing quite good. So we're expecting 3.2% for this year, and also for 1920. We see good global growth, solid growth of around 3%. This is of course a little bit different if we look at country by market. So the regions are quite different. United States, for example, really strong in the last couple of months or years due to the new government, so high fiscal stimulus, tax reductions, and so on. And this really boosted the US economy, especially in 18 and so on. But what we think, of course, in 19, you see that in the chart on the graph, is that we're expecting a little bit of a slowdown in the US due to these tariffs. So it could be also an own goal for the United States. But one thing, of course, is that these fiscal stimulus investments are a little bit going down, and interest rate is going up, and this is, of course, impacting or have an impact on the United States economy. Maybe more interesting, the Eurozone, not too bad. So we had a really recovery path in the past, really good recovery in Southern Europe, where we had big recessions a couple of years ago. And for this year, we think around about 2%. Next year, mainly driven also by the United Kingdom development economy, we will see kind of a slowdown down to 1.7% for the Eurozone. Of course, there are some other markets which are kind of like fragile. For example, Italy with a new government, high debt levels. So you're not sure what will happen in the next couple of months in these countries. Also, we have Spain, for example, the Catalonian crisis could pop up again. So these are threats for the Eurozone, but I will come to that later with some more details. China, so really the main contributor to growth. What we see at the moment is a bit of a reduction in growth, so more healthier growth. So the government is doing tries to reduce debts, shadow banking, all these shadow business, shadow banking, and tries to have a healthier growth. So around 6%, not 7%, and that is what we are seeing at the moment in China. And due to the tariffs, the new tariffs which are coming, we have reduced our forecast for China also a bit, so it will definitely have an impact in the next couple of months. Other countries maybe of interest, Japan, Korea, or Japan in this field, with slight growth. Japan also high debt levels. We have a value-added tax coming, so an increase in value-added tax, and also demographics is always a big topic in Japan, Korea. And of course, the weather conditions with earthquakes, hurricanes, and so on. India is kind of like of the champion at the moment, so they did a lot of progress in the past from the infrastructure, financial system, and that's what we can see here in the numbers. So over 7% growth. Also for the car markets, or for the car industry, India is quite interesting. So people are earning more money, so they really can buy their first vehicle. So they switch from motorcycle to car, so they are then part of the new car market. So quite interesting customers. Brazil, always quite volatile, so we have new elections coming, but dependency on energy costs and also due to currency, always a little bit volatility. So this year we see a kind of recovery with 1.5% growth, but all in all, there are a lot of structural problems, financial problems, which could not be solved in the next 2 or 3 years. Russia is kind of like the same, so we have sanctions for Russia. We had some good growth this year due to the Football World Cup, so investments were made. What we of course see is that the car manufacturers are going back to the Russian car market, so they invested a lot in the past, and now with a recovery, with things kind of getting under control or more clarity, they will restart to invest and increase capacity in Russia. It's a huge market, and sales volumes are at the moment quite low compared to the size of the country or the population. If we look at the growth potential from 17 to 27, I think no surprise, Asia Pacific will be the region which provide the most growth. If we look at the numbers, other regions which are providing growth, of course, North America with still potential, Western Europe, but also emerging Europe with some markets like Poland, Czech Republic, which are doing quite well at the moment. So they're really benefiting from their neighboring countries and the recovery in Western Europe. So they're doing quite good. Brexit, maybe I can skip the chart. This is the vehicle sales outlook for United Kingdom. I think we prepared the slide a couple of months ago. Not really a lot changed in our assumptions. We have a contingency forecast, so base case, pessimistic scenario and optimistic scenario. And what we expect is if we have the base case where we think that there will be a deal and they will hammer out a free trade agreement, then the impact on the car levels or sales volume levels will be not so drastic. If you look at the volumes, we are still on a very high level. Even if we have a pessimistic scenario with no deal, and we'll have, of course, as the other speakers say, an interruption. So it will be there will be a lot of problems for the currency, for the labor market, and so on. But for the car markets, we are not expecting a drastic impact. So that's really totally collapsing. We see that at the moment. If we talked last year, we said, okay, the Brexit will have a big impact on the car market, but it was not so bad in the last couple of months if we have a look on the volumes. So the market is still quite solid. Unemployment rate quite low, so really good conditions in general. But definitely due to this, in 6 months we will know more, and then we will have, of course, an interruption. And I will come to that later when we look at production volumes, what could happen or what will be the impact on that one. So we're coming more to sales and production outlook, so more numbers. This is our assumptions for sales growth in 18, so from 17 to 18, and which region contributing growth on a global perspective, so from the demand side. And totally we think that the global market will grow just 0.8%. So it was reduced in the last couple of months, mainly due to China, where we are more pessimistic at the moment, and of course Turkey, for example, where the market really collapsed in the last 2 months by 50% and more due to the lira crisis and all the things going on there. So that's the main reason. If we look at the main contributors, Indian market, quite strong, with huge potential from the population. And as I said, people now are in the situation to go into the car markets from a motorcycle or something other, so that they are really reaching an income where they can afford a car. So this will be also in the future a very important market to sell vehicles. South America, as I said, a bit volatile. Brazilian market quite good at the moment, boosting volumes in that region, but always a little bit mixed if you look from country by country in that region. West Europe quite strong, still some recovery. We had, of course, also some incentives in Germany, for example, diesel incentives, and in other countries to really get rid of these old, not eco-friendly vehicles, and this also boosted vehicles or numbers in West Europe. But we have, of course, also some problems in West Europe. I think you heard about WLTP, so the structure in the market and volumes are really volatile, so we were up before that date where this WLTP is valid. Markets were really up to do some last-minute registration of these old non-certified vehicles, and then the markets really collapsed in September, so up 30%, then down 30%, so it's also quite difficult to forecast for me. Other region which is providing good growth, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, as I mentioned, Russia, Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, with on a recovery path with solid growth rates and growth numbers. ASEAN, I think also no surprise, economies with strong economic growth, and they are also demanding more vehicles. On the other side, North America, coming from really high levels, now we see some slowdown, so some incentives were not available anymore, and that's also seen then on the car markets. China as well, also incentives are not in place anymore. They have, of course, these environmental problems, and that's a reason why the market is not bringing so much growth this year in 18. This is on the global perspective, so you can see that from now to 2025, what we are expecting, global light vehicle sales, and if you see the dotted line, that are the saturated markets, developed markets, so Oceania, Japan, Korea, North America, and West Europe, and you see that we are not expecting any further growth in the next year, so it's really sideways movement. Where's growth coming from? China, India, ASEAN, so this is the main message here, that there is still potential to sell cars, and we will surpass the 100 million border in the next, 3 years, 4 years. So there is still good news for the car industry, that there are still new customers and they need cars. yeah, this is on the European perspective, also sales outlook to 2025, and it's similar that we have these developed big markets which are not providing any further growth in the next years. Growth in this region is coming from Central Eastern European countries. Turkey, of course, next year will be really tough, but then we think that there will also be a recovery and volumes will go up step by step again. So these are the countries or regions where we're expecting further growth in Europe. Maybe more interesting for you, production outlook. This is just 2018 European Union production by destination market. So vehicles which are produced in Europe and are going to Germany, for example. So that's that you see which countries are responsible for, in this case, really flat performance. If we look at 17 and 18 numbers, so it's kind of like flat European Union production, and you see where is this production going. So we see that UK, we see a reduction of -5%. Also Turkey, this is of course European Union production. So if we really look at Turkish production, it would be massively more lower. But so vehicles from the European Union going to Turkey are not such a big impact, -20%. And of course, a lot of them is inventory. I also mentioned that due to this WLTP change, a lot of vehicles are not available or not certified. So a lot of OEMs shut down their production facility for a couple of days, weeks. And we will also see that when the Brexit will come, that a lot of OEMs already announced to do their yearly maintenance in the plants, to really shut down the plants for that certain time to have no real surprise, or will be kind of like prepared for it, because it's better to have a shut down plant than have to shut it down when it's working on that day. I hope that was a good explanation. So if we look at global production outlook to 2025, so we're expecting a global CAGR, so compound annual growth rate of 2%, and you can have a look on the different regions where we see some growth increase in that on production levels, and where we think it's flat. So for example, European Union, less than 1% growth, so kind of like stable volumes in that area. But regions, of course, no surprise, with big growth rates: China, India, ASEAN, Brazil, Russia. So these emerging BRIC markets will provide most growth going forward. Yeah, I think we saw that picture this morning, just some risks to the European outlook. Trade war, of course, a big topic at the moment. And if we look at what is the impact on the car market, so here just production dependency to US exports in 2018. And we see that Canada, for example, is quite dependent on exports to the US, but they have now a deal. So this new NAFTA deal, or I don't know how they call it exactly, is made. Same for Mexico. South Korea also had now a kind of like an agreement with the US. So Japan, European Union, so they could really face some problems going forward because there's no agreement yet. And the European Union, especially premium manufacturers, are really dependent on exports to the US. And that will be interesting to see what will happen in that in the next couple of months. China, of course, not so important to export vehicles to the US, but the other tariffs on steel, aluminum, and so on other goods are quite a big problem or big challenge for China as well. Other risks, no deal, I think, as I mentioned, the OEMs start to prepare for the event or for that day to reduce production or to stop production in that time period, but nobody really knows what will happen. I think everybody is hoping that there will be a last-minute agreement, so that they, or transition period, so that things could go quickly back to normalization. But I'm pretty sure there will be an interruption and will be different than the situation we have at the moment. So will definitely have an impact. Other risks, as I mentioned, WLTP, so this new certification could increase CO2 taxation in a lot of countries in Europe. Depends really on market by market. But due to this new procedure, the CO2 taxation could be really bad, I would say, in some markets in the UK, but also in France, for example. Vehicles could get quite really expensive, so more expensive than before. And all to these new emission standards, vehicles are getting more expensive. So now it's a question, we had that topic, the car industry is in the transition period, so from the classic car industry to electrification, autonomous driving, and so on. And this will be also kind of like bringing some uncertainty to the markets, because people do not know which car should they buy, because it's not clear from the government, by law, do I need a Euro 6, Euro 6D temp, or what else vehicle to go into the city center of London, of Frankfurt, of Berlin. And there are everyday news about that topic, and especially the private customers are quite irritated and confused about it. And it's definitely necessary that there are clear rules, or that you have a kind of like a plan for the next couple of years, which car I can buy. Otherwise, it will be really an own goal for the car industry, because people will wait and see if there's new laws or new rules, so that they can be sure to buy a car which could go to a city center or to a city in the next couple of years. Other new trends or risks: mobility as a service, we heard that, connectivity, autonomous driving, but also other means of transport play a role here, as cars are getting more expensive due to the new technique and things you need to provide a car which have low emission or no emission. So cars will be more expensive, and there are some alternatives in the market. And for example, I was in Paris last week, and I saw a lot of these electric scooters and so on. So there's a lot of things happening and going on. So that's also another sign that the car industry will move in a really other direction, or in a really new world going forward. OEM consolidations. So we had this Opel, Vauxhall, PSA thing, and we are pretty sure that there will be some more. I cannot really tell you which OEMs that will be, but we have, for example, FCA could be a candidate. So there are some rumors that they could be bought by another company, Hyundai maybe, I don't know. And there are also some other OEMs which could also stop their vehicle sales in the region Europe, for example, Honda, just an example. So especially their plant capacities in the UK doesn't really support the future for Honda, and they really dropped a lot of nameplates in the last couple of months. So it could be a question if it's worth for them to stay in Europe to sell vehicles. So we have some candidates who really could change their strategy going forward due to these regulations, WLTP, and also Brexit. So a lot of threats and risks which are still in place. This is the compliance impacting total industry volumes. So the emission standards will be really a challenge for everybody, for all parts in the car industry. And this could also bring down volumes, total industry volumes, due to the higher costs of vehicles. And last but not least, some summary. So developing markets will continue to concentrate on volume growth. Advanced markets will stabilize in volume terms and continue to expand in value. US trade agreements, still not sure what will be the final agreement or what will come up with that, but it's still not good, because it's impacting, countries are getting nervous, you don't know what will happen, so this is not good for investments and for the whole economies. In the EU, flattish macro settings craft the EU forecast. But as I mentioned, there are a lot of threats and serious things happening at the moment, which could really have a big impact on the EU forecast. Midterm compliance becomes the core challenge in Europe. So it's really coming closer and closer, this transition to new alternative vehicles and so on. And this will be, of course, a big challenge for the whole industry. Thank you. That was my part, and hope you have some questions for the question and answer session now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Martin. Thank you to the panel. I think there was some very interesting presentations there that gave us outlooks in various ways for the future. Now it's your turn, maybe a quick 5 minutes of Q&A. So if you've got a question, please raise your hand, wait for the microphone to come to you, and then say your name and your company name, and then ask the question, make your comment, agreeing, disagreeing with the panel, especially disagreeing with the panel. That's much more fun. So please, I'll throw it out firstly to you. Is there any questions from the audience? Except for him.
Sorry. I've got a serious question. Mr. De Corner, what you said, some of the things that you said were very interesting, particularly about supply chain. You said that you were moving more to a globalized supply chain. Now, historically, of course, the supply chain, Nissan's occasionally a bit of an exception, but the supply chain has been highly local. So can you sort of describe to us what you think the geography of the supply chain will look like and the sorts of logistic services needed to support that will look like? Just a quick question there.
Okay, I think I mentioned that I think it's something that is in flux and it's in competition. So traditionally Nissan's had a mixture of, obviously we've got a very high percentage of local content on the Qashqai, for example, which was the first car that we specifically designed in the European market for Europe and sourced locally. And quite frankly, that makes it our most competitive car. It makes the supply chain easier to manage than the traditional cars where it was designed in Japan, sourced in Southeast Asia generally, and we had a high KD content of parts coming across. So I think the challenge we're going to have, as per my slide, is we've got, in theory, a Renault-Nissan-Mitsubishi alliance which is going to be using common platforms, which by nature you would expect the purchasing department, which is an alliance purchasing department, to source the common parts in one place. And the reason we do that is obviously tooling costs are normally the deal breaker as to whether we localize a part or have a common global part. From a supply chain perspective, my hope is that the weight of volume in Europe, particularly with Renault, which is obviously part of my responsibility, means that we'll have a higher percentage of what I would call local parts sourced for European factories. So that's an advantage we'll have, and I think the aim is maybe to have 70% localized, but quite frankly I couldn't tell you the answer of how it will end up, because there'll be a total delivered cost assessment done on every single sourcing decision based on tooling investment, parts piece price cost, free cash flow life cycle for the vehicle life. So I'm sorry I can't answer your question specifically. From a supply chain perspective, I would love everything to be local, and I would love a much higher percentage of just-in-time deliveries, because I don't want big warehouses full of parts. I don't want low safety stock and then running on shortages that I have to air freight from Japan or Thailand or gearboxes from Mexico. But the reality is there will be a mixture of that for all of the big global alliances. So I think watch this space is the answer, I'm afraid. In an ideal world, I think we'll get in a better condition because of the Renault volume. Renault's obviously a very huge player in Europe, about 1.8 million vehicle sales in Europe compared to Nissan's sort of 500,000-600,000.